Howdy folks, how you all going?
Hello, Mr.
Minister,
Seymour.
build jobs are down again, but not as much as last time. Does that suggest an improvement?
I think there's a recovery underway. Obviously, we've had to go through inflation, interest rates, recession, unemployment, but as the government gets its hand on the tiller, we are turning the ship around and outcomes are getting better. It's not instant. I understand that there's an awful lot of pain through an economic cycle like this, but I believe the government is doing the right things, saving money itself, cutting red tape, and you're starting to see that confidence return.
But Mr. Seymour, the threshold for
that,
Māori seats has risen to 8. What do you make of the number of Māori that have swapped roles, and now we have 8 seats?
Well, of course, you've got an enormous growth in the population who identify as Māori, so that in itself is not surprising. I'd be surprised if actually the number of seats has kept up with the number of people who identify as Māori. You've now got 20% of New Zealanders who identify as Māori, however 8 is just a fraction over 10% of the seats, so it's about half the people. That doesn't really seem to have changed.
Do you think that we should have that 8th seat in 2026?
Well, frankly, I think you've got to follow the electoral law. You can't always make the change before each election. It's important these things are done really well.
With your ACT Party leader hat on, can you quickly just remind us of your position when it comes to the Paris climate change?
Look, we're part of a government that's committed to the Paris Climate Agreement. However, we also see that the world is changing, and we're going to be working on the basis going into the next election. Paris needs to change or New Zealand needs to leave. That is a matter for the next election. We are keeping our commitments to this Paris commitment that we made at the last election.
In terms of climate change causing a lot of disasters here, though, do you think there's some tension there with perhaps pulling out of Paris and the disasters that we're seeing here?
Well, the issue is New Zealand being in Paris doesn't make a blind bit of difference to disasters in New Zealand. What does make a difference is actually investing in the local infrastructure. For example, I was down in Hawke's Bay just after the disaster 2 years ago. On one side of the river in Taradale, everyone was fine. On the other side, apple orchards devastated. What was the difference? Having proper stock banks. That makes a difference. Being involved in some sort of foreign agreement, which other countries that emit far more than us are ignoring, doesn't make a blind bit of difference.
Stock banks don't stop the natural disasters from coming, right? They might
Well,
mitigate the effects.
Yeah, but stop banks do stop things. That's the whole point of stop banks. And as you saw on the Taradale side, it mitigated the effects. And if it saved your home, then that's important. And you're right, adapting and mitigating is a far more powerful thing that the New Zealand government can do to protect New Zealanders against the effects of climate, whether it's changing or not. What you've got to remember about Hawke's Bay is that in 1938, there was an almost identical disaster and sequence of events where people died. It is critical that we adapt as much as we try to mitigate.
But can you do both things? Can you try and lower emissions as well as
Well,
adapt?
as a matter of fact, the world doesn't work like that. If you do one thing, that takes away from how much you can do the other. And I think for too long, New Zealand governments have thought that they could actually do anything they wanted. What happened is New Zealanders end up paying the bill. So if we're going to put devastating costs on New Zealand households, that reduces our ability to pay for things such as stormwater management. You know, where I live in Auckland, having blocked drains costs people their houses. So actually sometimes what you need is to clear the drains.
Just a couple of comments ago you said something along the lines of, and do excuse me if I slightly paraphrase here, but the climate, if it's changing or not. Can you return to that?
Yeah, my point is that regardless of what you think about climate change, adaptation makes sense because bad weather will always be a danger to people.
What did you do about climate change?
Well, I could give you a chapter.
Is the climate change?
Oh, undoubtedly so. But the question you want to ask is what's the anthropogenic contribution to that? That's a whole other debate. Thank you.
David?
Yeah.
The Prime Minister said yesterday that he expects to announce the new methane targets, etc., very shortly. I understand Cabinet has discussed them. Are you on board with the Cabinet paper? And are those recommendations at the lower end of the Shadbolt recommendation?
First of all, I would never confirm or deny if Cabinet had a discussion. Second of all, I wouldn't divulge the details. And third, I always support Cabinet unless ACT has explicitly said it agrees to disagree.
So therefore, the policy that you released last week is something that you're planning to go into the election with rather than action now?
Well, if I was to answer that, I might confirm or deny if there'd been a discussion in Cabinet. Now, Richard, you've been a journalist for a very long time, and you're very, very wily, but I'm onto you.
What's your position on New Zealand First's pledge to make Kiwisaver contributions not only mandatory but 10%?
Well, the fact is you can do 10% on your Kiwisaver right now, but many people choose to pay down their mortgage, invest in their kids' education, invest in their business. I'm not sure it helps to force people to put that money in one particular investment scheme where the rules will always be set by politicians at the end of the day.
The United Nations Special Representative for Disaster Risk Reduction is in the country looking at our response.
I'm delighted.
He hopes we continue to stay on the path of science and evidence-based policy making when it comes to climate change. Do you think that's at odds at all with the announcement?
No, I think for too long we haven't been on the right rail when it comes to science and evidence-based policy making. For example, for too long we have failed to account for the fact that methane is a different gas from carbon monoxide. As an agricultural nation highly exposed to methane, I think we need to have honest conversations about how methane is different from CO2, because we're a country with lots of cows feeding lots of people that live outside our country. I think we've had a raw deal as a result of that, and we should be forming alliances with like-minded countries who are also heavily exposed to methane emission costs. So,
how close is the coalition government to making a decision on whether or not to officially recognise Palestinian state?
Well, the government's policy remains as it has always been. There is active consideration of whether that should change. An announcement will be made by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but I can't say when that will be right now.
And just on Paris, you were saying that in terms of mitigation and in terms of adaptation, it's difficult to kind of do both at once. Are you saying it's impossible to do both at once?
No, I'm just saying if you spend $1 on one thing, you can't spend it on another thing. That's just basic opportunity cost. So if you've got to spend it on something or the other, I would say oftentimes, if not most of the time, actually protecting New Zealanders against the kinds of disaster effects that we've seen is better value than reducing emissions when the other countries aren't doing so.
But the government doesn't have just $1; it has more than that to spend. So
Well, what we need is a government that spends each dollar carefully and decides, is this dollar better used on one thing or the other?
But are you saying we should be putting all of our money towards mitigation, or?
No, I'm saying we should make sensible decisions at the margin, dollar by dollar. And I just say, look, having seen my suburb flooded because they didn't clear the drains, sometimes things like that matter a lot more. All right.
Can we get your reflections on the result of the Tāmaki Makaurau by-election?
Yeah, look, I think it's a real worry for New Zealand. It shows Labour cannot vote. It's a real worry for New Zealand. It shows Labour cannot govern without the Māori Party. That means that all of the antics that they've got up to, openly calling people invalid, saying that you're not enough of a Māori, that you can't contest an election or you shouldn't contest an election because you're black or Asian or Pākehā. I mean, this is just outright racism. And the idea that someone can behave that way, 35,000 voters in the Tāmaki Makaurau electorate stayed home instead of coming out to oppose that. That really worries me, and it worries me for New Zealand because it also means if we ever get a Labour government, it will most likely be dependent on Te Pāti Māori and all of the racist rhetoric that goes with that.
Do you think that Labour needs to be clearer to voters now what that relationship might look like if they were in the position to govern?
Look, first of all, Chris Hipkins can't say what a woman is, now he can't say what a racist is. I mean, how hard is it for him to say what Taka Tawhera said is disgraceful? All right, thank you very much, guys. Cheers.